Hi, my name is Randhula and we are having a conversation with Kasturi today at She Slays for Echelon. Kasturi, let's get started with the big picture. You've contributed to the Sri Lankan economy for decades now. Are you happy with where the country is at right now?
You open up with a tough question. Firstly, let me lay context. Yes, I've been in the workforce for over 3 decades, right? And I've seen from a time I was a kid, I think through 77, I've experienced the time where we didn't have access to food, where we had coupons, even for rations and stuff. Then we went through, being from the minority, been at the receiving end of the 83 communal riots. As a country, we've gone through war. Then we went through an economic kind of semi-crisis post the war, came out of it. Today, we went through the pandemic, right? And we handled it quite well compared to the rest of the world. And the situation we are in is one of virtually, I think we're struggling to be solvent, and we have a forex liquidity issue. We've come out of things like having ethnic disharmony. We've worked towards it, and you don't do things, you don't find solutions alone. So in this context, I think, look, none of us would be happy with this situation. As a Sri Lankan, I would want my country to do better. As Sri Lankans, I would want to see people having access to be able to run businesses, to have jobs, and to see their kids being able to really live their lives better. But unfortunately, it's going to be tough times. I think what I would like to see more is collaboration between government, private sector, opposition, politicians leaving political agendas aside, media leaving, doing the role by the country, and making sure you restructure, you kind of find a solution. And the solution is not going to be easy. You're not going to get overnight inflows of foreign currency because the negative sentiments which are out there. So how do we band together to say, yeah, it's tough times, but we would come out of it this way. So I think that is important. And I think people in power now kind of understand, and they're trying to work towards it, but we should have done this a bit earlier. And the fact that this problem is not going to go away. I think that we also have to understand as people that this is not going to go with a magic wand, and there's no quick fix. So in that context, am I happy that our country is going through this? No, I'm not. I guess with every crisis, you have to look at opportunity, right? And the opportunity is not only for growth, but for us to be more productive and efficient. So even the private sector has to be more efficient, do more with the same resources. The apparel sector is one sector I admire because they're competing globally. So they're always reinventing themselves. The state, public sector, you fight for salary increases, but also you try and be more productive. They're citizens before they are a public servant, right? That's what really irks me. We forget who we are. We are people of the land, and this is our land. We can't go to any other country and say, this is my country. So why don't we do our part to make that happen? And we all have to start. It starts from us. So that way I'm not happy at all, because I know I'm sure if the government takes a tough decision, the opposition is waiting to hammer, and the media, they use the media for all sorts of stuff. But I wish it's a lovely wish list, but I wish we could all wake up and think country matters and do what's right by the country. At least make sure that the next generation, our kids, have a better life, and we take the brunt for that. Yeah.
Your answer really touched on so many different aspects. You talked about crisis, you talked about seeing opportunity in the crisis, and you talked about what you're really unhappy about of people's take on this crisis as well. And I'm going to draw from that, Kasturi, into our next question. Hema's Holdings announced you as the Group Chief Executive Officer on 1st of October 2020. This was celebrated. This was also the height of the pandemic. we didn't know when the lockdowns were going to end. We didn't know very many things. It was a lot of uncertainty around us. And what was expected out of you wasn't anything that was expected out of anybody who was on that seat before. Let's talk a bit about that. Tell us about how you took charge, the impact or the pivots that you made in your company by taking charge at a point like that, with a position like that.
Yeah, Randhula, now fast forward, I must tell you, even though I took over officially on the 1st of October, the preparation of me being the successor took place, I think, easily 3 years before, but there were other people, who were also being groomed. And maybe 12 months before they kind of accelerated, and I knew I had to find a successor in the existing business. But the mandate at that point, remember, I'm just playing context, is how my mindset had to change, was how do you take this business and grow, and how do you unleash potential of the people? So it was all strategic growth, new growth. It was nothing to do with looking at driving through crisis. And March happens, and when I become a deputy CEO, I realized, all my plans had to be shelved, and I was definitely not going to even use those. So it was tough. It was a change in how I had to look at the business. I still was, and I'm a very competitive person. So while and maybe coming from the sports background, I'm used to uncertainty and challenges, and I'm used to making decisions during that time. And I'm also used to making a decision, and next day when you see another challenge, making another decision. So because that's how the sports field is. But the pressure on that is how do I navigate this company? Because remember, during Easter Sunday, we also got impacted, right? By any chance, we didn't need that. But the most important thing was Hema's was we were importing essential drugs and we were manufacturing near essentials. How do you make sure that you keep people safe and you get this whole mechanism and ecosystem running? And in healthcare, particularly in pharma, we had to be the leader because you're a leader, right? You're the market leader. And by far, how can you say, let's wait for somebody else to find a solution? You have to find the solution. That was basically it. My thought process. How do I get the teams calm? I was clear that I had 3 buckets I worked on. But firstly, I had to calm down the teams, because remember, they were seeing the volatility around, and when you're in these businesses, you see what's happening firsthand. Give them a sense of security. Train them or teach them how to take care of themselves. So while that happened, how can you extract more out of the business you're doing? That's the core business. How can you what was the strategy on that? So you have to become healthier, gain market share. That was there. But I also said that doesn't mean you're not going to grow new business, because what we didn't do enough was innovation. So we kind of push teams to think out of the box and encourage the younger generation to speak their mind and think out of the box, because sometimes all of us, we've been through the system too long and we've lost the ability to be innovative, and we have to acknowledge that. So you need to bring this fresh blood, but give them an ecosystem to think.
Sure.
And amazingly, we started this agenda of measuring and bringing out innovation. And the amazing things, I think somebody brought this heirloom rice.
Yes.
And it was inspired by, I think, SK2 was doing something, and they said, why can't Sri Lankan rice is so good? And we accelerated that. And the third aspect is how can we be more productive? And I must say, as a country, but more than the country, as a company, we had not leveraged on digital. So we actually had to accelerate that. And so you keep the simple pillars, track those, encourage them, understand the impact on what work from home would mean to everybody. Especially when you're working from home, it's not the work. The fact that, especially from a woman's point of view, I understood when you have kids and husbands and you don't have the domestics coming in, what it means. So while you adjust to that, I think we just made sure that it was business as usual, not as usual, but business. And how can we grow from that? But and remember, when I took over, it was mostly virtual, right? How do I engage with the team, and how do I get them understand my strategy? So it was not easy, but I guess you do it slowly, you chip away consistently, you message it, and you be the change what you want to see in others. So basically, yeah.
Living your words of wisdom.
I guess so.
And at this time, Kasturi, your appointment to now, you're celebrated largely as a woman leader and the first woman to be leading a conglomerate in Sri Lanka in this position. Let's also talk about the unheard side of this story. What learnings and unlearnings did you have to go through this role, and what kind of pressure does it add to you actually on a day in, day out?
Yeah, so, Randhula, that was the biggest learning for me. Was I grew a lot because of it. Is because while I was focusing internal and getting ready to take over the role and figuring out successor for the existing business, what I was handling, and this announcement came, I think it came somewhere in May or June, I realized the impact it had outside, right? So weirdly, I had a couple of buckets. The biggest bucket was the younger generation who were like my cheerleaders, saying, thanks to you, we have hope. And that really kind of opened my eyes, thinking, look, the younger generation is looking at me as hope, and they aspire to now, it's kind of a path open for them. But this path, I have to succeed to make sure that path is not a path of legacy of failure. But then you have the rest. There are people who said, yeah, what's a big deal? And yeah, because she was a woman, she got the job, and you forget what you've achieved. And really, and when I was in crisis, and at least the country was in crisis, and we were navigating the business in this environment, my thing was, look, whatever happens, I cannot fail. I cannot let the first 12 months define, and it can't go down, can't be bad, because that's not the legacy I want to leave the younger generation. So I had to eliminate all the noise of the people around and just focus on work. And it was unbelievable, the pressure it had on me. And even though I didn't speak about it then, it really did have a toll on me, because it was like, imagine the narrative if Himas had degrowth because I took it over. Imagine the narrative on that. Leave it to me, forget about me. I would have, Kasturi would have come and gone. But imagine the impact on the younger generation. So that was my whole obligation. I need to make sure that a woman could, because I didn't realize the impact it had outside, right? So I was not prepared for that. When I realized that impacted them so much, I was quite keen that I just have to leave it so that I at least be successful, so that many other talented women can be way more successful than me. So that was a pressure, and COVID didn't help at all.
Sure.
And now the economy doesn't help, but at least now it's almost 2 years since I kind of took over as deputy CEO. So, yeah.
Definitely a trail that you've blazed on for very many more to follow.
I think there are so many talented people who are really way better than me, women who would do much better than me.
And thank you for giving them hope and continuing to do so, if I may speak on their behalf.
If it was, I learned the word, the glass cliff. Somebody sent that note to me, and I didn't know what it meant. I've heard about shattering the glass ceiling, but the glass cliff. So when I went through that, I went and Googled it. It meant putting a woman in a position which is really tough that you can't achieve. So if you don't, because it's kind of a really tough position, and if you don't achieve or succeed, you say it's because of a woman, because it was a woman who took that role.
Sure.
So I was really, and somebody kind of drew parallels to that.
That's a view from the top we usually don't hear of. Kasturi, let's move on to a bit of your personal journey through the crisis, especially. Let's first talk about the idea of power. You are in a powerful position. You've been in power for a long time. What have you learned about yourself since you became a well-known figurehead in the corporate Sri Lankan world?
So for me, power is not a title. It has never been. I would say that for me, definition is being able to do things which matter to you. And even in the corporate setting, having the control and power to do the changes I want and to actually shape the future of young people. And if you look around now at Hemas, I think we have quite a bit of young talent in the mid-30s who are holding directors' roles. And I'm proud to say most of them, quite a bit of female leaders there. And the power of putting the right people at the right place, irrespective of the biases, I think is important. Personally, I think everybody, if you are in a place where you could help somebody, support somebody, and not expect anything in return because that person can't give you anything back, that's a place of power. And that's how you use it. So everybody has power, whichever role you are in, whichever part of society and whichever job you're doing, you have the power. You have the choice of making choice of using it wisely. So I guess for me, if I choose to use whatever power or whatever levers I have within my control to impact the company or impact the people in the company to achieve greater things, that means I've done my job well. And the legacy I should leave is, and I've told our leadership team, because we've got all our leadership team is about all in their early 50s, barring one who is a young lady. Other than that, so the legacy should be we should groom a team of young leaders who will do way better than us. And when we leave, we should see them growing way better than what we did. And that sense of you've used your power rightly.
Absolutely.
And that's basically on a personal side is where I would say use it in a way you could impact society positively. And again, I'll go back to helping people for no reason because they won't be able to help you back. Don't expect anything in return. Yeah.
We spoke about how the past 2 years was for you, assuming the position and powering through it, changing the strategies and getting your team also on board to work with you through it. Tell me a little bit about how it was for you personally, how it affected your personal life, what you lived through as Kasturi the person.
Randhula, it was one of the toughest too. It was really tough. While I had the energy I was really up for the challenge and I love challenges. Personally, a big part of my motivation is my kids, my family. And my two boys they're my entire world, right? And with the pandemic, they were in Australia. And I remember I'm a person who, to lay context, I would fly every 3 months to see them, even for 4 days, just to get connected with them and come back. And you just start the year thinking, okay, 3 months, 6 months, I could see them. And the strain shows. And you can't even fly to see them. So for me, while I navigate and be strong, and while there is vulnerability. I'm a human being. Sometimes I didn't have a choice. I couldn't break down because those that I couldn't control. I couldn't control the borders opening. So I'd rather not. I just could control the fact that if anything happened to them or happened to me, that God willing something I'll be able to access them. And so I managed it. But it took a lot out of me, and so much so I think eventually Hussein, who's our chairman, he realized there's a huge strain on me, and he just said, when borders opened and I said I'm going off to Dubai for a break, he said you need the break, just go, because it's been a long time. But it's really tough, and the worst was when both my kids got COVID finally in December, and I was here, and imagine when your loved one gets COVID, and these are kids, they're not kids, they're adults. And I appreciate the Sri Lanka health system so much more, and versus Australia, because the kids had to just navigate for themselves, take care of themselves. And the helpline was a Sri Lankan doctor here, and we even had medicines being couriered because one of their friends, my elder son's girlfriend, had it bad. But so that took a toll on me, and so much so that I eventually, the day they kind of all said they're negative and stuff, I realized my stress knots had got so bad, I had to go for physiotherapy. So that's the amount of toll. So it takes a lot. Then in the meantime, you are also navigating the 2 years with this whole thing of Kasturi the leader, you're navigating the news items, and you have so many people waiting to criticize you as a person, or wondering why you became the CEO. And I'm like, at one point you had to just stop and put your head down and work. So it opened my eyes up a lot about people, and then it also just made me focus on things I can control. And yeah, it was not easy. It was not easy, but I must say, like any challenge, when you're in it, you don't see it, but you come out of it, and then you think, you have that, you could do it. And a lot of it is you don't do it alone. You even speak to even as a CEO, I'll speak to my chairman. I need somebody's support, and I'll speak to the board and get other people's support. So because you're a human being, you're not a
superhuman machine.
Super machine, right? Forget the gender.
Sure.
And you're not supposed to come without vulnerability. So
it means a lot to hear it from you, and for you to really be transparent with that side of the story too. I think gives a lot of people that empowerment needed to bite the bullet. Because there's also a lot of us where we see times getting really tough with all this noise, and I think it helps a lot to also hear it from you.
And I think I was lucky at my team, my direct reports, all the MDs, and are very amazing human beings. So they all understand it. They all understand you're first human beings and you all have a role to play. But yeah, it was okay to be vulnerable with them.
What frustrates you, Kasturi?
Yeah. So I think I alluded to it before. What frustrates me is why people. So for me, I'm a person, I'm happy with what I define as for myself, right? And if I'm happy with what I've, forget the title, I'm saying if whatever job I did, I was happy with it, that's fine. But when people out there say, why is she good, is she bad? I mean, it just frustrates me. I'm thinking, why are they measuring me from their standards? I'm measuring myself the way I am, and of course results can measure. So what frustrates me is that people in society, they actually compete so much. Even though it's a small island, it's big enough for all of us to be our unique self and do very well. I mean, I've seen you grow from your hatched days, and I mean, I think you're one of the talented stars, up and coming stars. And I mean, I think last year I listened to you at Women's Day, and I thought, wow, that was such a great impacted so many. And that's your unique self. You're not me. I will never be you. So it's that constant thing. And in the last 2 years, I got an overdose of that. So that really frustrates me. Yeah.
And what does living a good life, a contended life, mean to you?
Oh, that is, I think people, if a person figures out what makes you happy, and it might change over period, right? But you should know that, and being self-aware and investing in that. For me, without exercise, I'm unhappy. So I invest in that. For me, my kids are a big part of my life. Now that borders opened up, I am like packing my bags and I'm out. I might work from Australia for a week or two, but that makes me happy. I need to go to church, and I love giving back into to people who are underprivileged. That makes me happy. Some people, it doesn't make them happy, that's fine. But as long as you know what fulfills you, that's a good life. And honestly, I wear my title or all my job very seriously, and I'm proud about it, and I love my company. But that doesn't define me. I'm doing, like, I'm sure everybody else has a job, and it so happens this is my job. That definitely doesn't define me. It fulfills me when I achieve results. It fulfills me when I build young talent and see them growing. So it depends, and I guess now the company plays a bigger part of my personal fulfillment because my kids are big and gone, and they're overseas. But when I was younger, I mean, the job only paid my bills, and that's what's a fulfillment. The money that was the truth. I waited for my payroll to make sure that I paid my school kids' bills, the food, and as long as I could feed them and keep a roof on their head and do things with them, that was my fulfillment. So you grow, evolve with time, right? And I love traveling around Sri Lanka, and if I can't do that, it's you have to figure out what makes you happy. And definitely you wouldn't find me trying to fit into society. Because if I'm the way I am, and if they don't, and that doesn't define whether I'm a good person or a bad person. They have to look it. And coming to that realization is absolutely a good life. And of course, have some good people around you whom you know have your back all the time, and you can love unconditionally. Yeah.
This is a question I ask from a lot of people, and this by far is one of the most honest answers that I've got. Really? Thank you for that. To end with Kasturi, going back to the big picture and also kind of combining it with your personal self, what do you believe one could or you could achieve in Sri Lanka that you can't achieve anywhere else in the world?
So at this stage in my life, I'm a Sri Lankan, and I'm identified here. And with that, I think I can do much more here for meaning younger generation, just the ones who come out of university, right? To help them to have more confidence and stuff. Put me in another location and another country, they wouldn't know the equity of what I bring in, and I wouldn't be able to impact people. So I guess what I can achieve here is my personal fulfillment, and giving back to the young is a big part of it. And I'm sure if no other country could give that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that reminds me, 3.5 years ago, my younger self talking to you, and I still remember the good advice you gave me. Thank you for all that you do for Sri Lanka and the younger generation and all that you are.
Thanks, Randhula.
Welcome to She Slays. Our topic today is why diverse teams drive better outcomes. My name is Bani Chandrasena, and I'm representing Diversity Collective Lanka. I have a great panel today. Let me introduce the panel. We have Sarah Twigg. Sarah is a gender employment and private sector specialist with the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. Sarah leads the IFC's Women in Work Sri Lanka partnership with the Government of Australia. We have Aroshi Nanayakkara, President of the Rotary Club Colombo and Director on the Board of Sampath Bank. She's also the Chair of the Women Directors Forum. We have Kshanika Ratnayake, Founder, Director, CEO of Great Place to Work Sri Lanka, part of a truly diverse and global network across 90 regions on a mission to build a better world by helping every place become a great place to work, focusing on the inclusive factor. Thank you all for joining. Let's get straight to the topic. Let me start with Sarah. Could we talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion, the two terms, and what the differences are?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great idea because these terms are used so frequently and interchangeably, and people don't often stop to think about what do we actually mean by diversity and what do we mean by inclusion. And they do mean quite different things. So if we think about diversity as being the what and inclusion as being the how. So really diversity in the workplace context is about your workforce composition. It's about who is in your workforce. So thinking about demographics, things like gender, things like disability, sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, religion. All of the aspects that make up individuals are what can bring diversity to the workforce. And really what companies should be aiming to do is to have a workforce that's diverse and that reflects the community in which it serves and which it operates. On the other side, inclusion, which is the how, is really about the measure of how well a work environment or a culture enables all of those diverse individuals to participate and to thrive. So really it's about things like who's at the table, whose voices are being heard, It's really ensuring that all employees, all customers are respected, are empowered, and regardless of their differences. And I think one of the things that's interesting to think about is that you can have diversity without inclusion. So what we sometimes see is that a business may have a diverse range of employees, but if there's not a supportive environment, then those who are outside the norm, let's say, don't feel accepted. They're not empowered to be able to work to their fullest. And if we think about maybe a couple of examples, you could have a workforce that maybe has a 50-50 split of women and men. But if all of the women are in lower skilled, lower paid positions, and all of the men are the ones who are making the decisions and have the leadership voice, you have diversity from a gender perspective, but you don't have inclusion.
Great, thank you for that. Let's move it into maybe one particular area, Aroshi. Would you like to talk a little bit about age? I know that's an area that we don't necessarily talk a lot about, but I think very relevant. If you could talk a little bit about it and some of the experiences you've had.
So Bani, I think this inclusivity or diversity per se has been focused on primarily on gender in the past so many years that we've been having this discussion. So I think some of the other areas that really need to come in is age. And do your boards now, I'm on the Sri Lanka Institute of Directors, I'm the senior vice chair, and we are looking at, in terms of corporate governance, what is the spectrum you're looking at in bringing onto your board? How many women are you including? Are there different ethnicities represented? And age, I think, is a critical factor, because increasingly we have, particularly in Sri Lanka, we have boards with primarily male, 55 to 65, 70-year-old males very mature, sitting on boards. And that younger generation and their aspirations, what are the products that they are out there looking for? What can you really offer them as a customer base? That whole conversation gets a little lost because you're not ready to change with the times. So I'm more focusing on the senior leadership at the board level. How do we make a mark there to make sure that you're including younger people, male or female, to bring in a completely different perspective onto your decision making at board level, let's say, or at senior management level. So there are highly educated, competent people who passed out from some of the topmost universities in the world. Plus, you've got very capable local universities, producing great people who get snapped up in international markets, but we are not really, picking that up, because we've got all kinds of little quirks that are hang-ups that are preventing us from really identifying that requirement and making it a more diverse platform at board level or at senior management level. So
I think that exemplifies this whole thinking outside the box, which is exactly what it is. Just one quote that comes to mind: Diversity Matters McKinsey 2015 talked about the positive relationship between financial performance and greater diversity in leadership. And I think that's exactly what you're focusing on. Kshanika, if we can maybe talk a little bit about, so diversity, inclusion, we're clear on. There is equity that we always hear with it. If we could unpack that a little.
That's right, because typically what happens is, you could have a diverse environment in which you have rolled out inclusive initiatives or activities. But however, the missing link or the real connect is to make sure that there is equity in the sense that you need to ensure that people have access to the same possibilities, everybody, because we also have to understand that there are obstacles and barriers when you have people of different background and you bring in different talent to a workforce. Right? So when that happens, the starting point for everybody is not the same. And that's a primary reason you're bringing in different talent to the organization, right? So how do you make it equitable? It's not about making it equal, but do we have systems that you help Other people, some need some additional support. Others need a leg up. Some are very good in a particular space. For example, we have somebody who's on the spectrum, right? Extremely creative and very good at what he or she does actually in her space. But however, she's awful at communication, right? And so there is a huge gap or barrier that someone, a leader or another team member, has to actually bridge the gap between how she interacts with the rest of the team. Otherwise, it could end up by her feeling isolated or not being able to actually be accepted into the team, and therefore you won't get the desired impact of creating a diverse and inclusive environment. So you have to create that equity, that balance. Understand that there are differences. The primary reason there's diversity is because it's different, right? And then you have to put in mechanisms in the organization by which we ensure that there is equity and you give the support required depending on that starting point. Just like a good example is, for example, in golf, we know the better ranked players need to do the same course in a less number of shots, right? They have they need to do it on a lower par, right? In order to win a round, right? Because they are already better at the game, and other people are playing catch up, right? So there is a sense of playing catch up, but there's a valid reason to have people who are playing catch up. We don't want people on a team because you just want to create diversity. It should never be the reason, right? But you have them there to bring in those differences that a team needs, and you create that diverse environment, and then you have to make sure you have those equity measures in place to ensure that you support them to get the desired outcome of creating diverse teams.
So I think what you're also saying is diversity is needed so that we can get the best out. But with diversity means different capabilities, abilities are different. So if you want everybody to feel comfortable, get the maximum out to get that overall performance of overall the team, it's being able to be flexible.
Yes.
And I think that is very relevant when it comes to policies, things like that in a company.
Bani, may I just add that stereotyping and unconscious bias are two things that, as human beings, those are our go-to reactions. It happens automatically kind of thing. But I think you have to be, as a leadership team, really be watchful about stereotyping. And I actually did my thesis was on a particular study on how good somebody looks, right? So the same person, we took and made him look nerdy, him and her both actually, and then made him look really good kind of thing. And everybody associated this good-looking guy with being able to perform incredibly well, far better than, so it's just complete stereotyping, and it happens immediately and automatically. So as I think leadership teams, you have to be really watchful that you don't just get caught up in that.
Sure.
And the reality, if I may add there, is we all will have unconscious biases.
Absolutely.
That's being human is that.
Absolutely.
But just being able to be more reflective before you make the decision becomes. If we can now move on, Sarah, a little bit, let's talk about why companies should care about diversity and inclusion. What's in it for them to actually take this step?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've seen study and study again has demonstrated that there is real value for businesses in actually focusing on greater diversity and inclusion. If we think about things like talent, which is, a huge issue for businesses in Sri Lanka right now, accessing talent. Focusing on diversity and inclusion not only widens your potential talent pool, because all of a sudden you're opening it up to a broader spectrum of the population, but it also enhances your value proposition as an employer. So you're opening it up to more employees, and then you're actually more attractive as an employer to those employees. We've also seen that it leads to increased revenue, and this is in part because it opens up new markets. So if businesses are thinking about diversity and inclusion not only in terms of their own workforce, but also in terms of potential markets and who they might be serving with their products or services, then it also increases their potential markets. Innovation, I think, is another big area. So we know that diverse teams are more innovative. You're bringing more perspectives to the table. And so, of course, you're going to be able to better problem solve and better innovate. So I think that's one of the really, really key reasons, is actually just having that diversity of perspectives. And then finally, I'd reflect on productivity. So we know that productivity improves in businesses where employees feel valued and where they feel supported. And so employee well-being is inherently linked to diversity and inclusion, and particularly the inclusion part of making sure that employees feel supported and feel welcome.
Sure. I think that links really well with the culture, the company cultures.
Correct.
Kshanika, if you wanted to share a little bit more about how
Yes.
Culture fits into all
Yes.
this.
So it is required to build a culture around that intent of, you can't just have it on the agenda and it won't just happen because you have some metrics and you have some targets that you need to meet in terms of diversity numbers of by age or by gender or differently abled people in your team. You have to first make it inclusive. Yes, you have to bring in the equity component, and then this has to be driven right from the top, right? Anything for it to become culture needs to be driven from top management itself, right? And then it has to be practiced in a consistent manner, regularly, over a long period of time before it becomes culture. It's not something that you decide today and tomorrow you suddenly have, because we're going to make a lot of mistakes. Even us, we, like I said, we have people on the spectrum, we have diversity in age, in gender, in all of these aspects. And some things work and some things don't work, right? So you have to adjust. But it is that willingness to think and to bring all of those aspects in, because when you create that environment, you automatically build a level of trust within that organization, right? And the work we do also as Great Place to Work, our work is also revolving around the fact that we are trying to build great workplaces for all employees, right? The for all is the important part here, because we're saying across all demographic groups, right? So age, gender, tenure, your background, where you come from, what your speciality is, who you know, what you do, all of that, right? And we're trying to create an egalitarian environment. You're not judged all the time by, the role you're playing. It's more about how you can build a sense of belonging for the individual, right? So if they feel valued, if they really believe, if you build a culture where people feel that they are valued, they are respected, right? Then they start contributing in amazing ways, right? Ways that you, even as a CEO or a leader whom you may have hired, may not expect this to happen, right? They start contributing, they go the extra mile, there's discretionary effort, right? And they really become an integrated part of that organization. And then now we are talking culture, right? Because it's becoming what we breathe, eat, live day in, day out, right? So that sense of belonging, which comes from creating these trusting bonds within the organization, really is what drives that. And then this becomes, like Sarah said, an incredible EVP for the organization, right? And then you use that to attract more people. You use that to retain your best talent. You use that in a way that you have now been recognized as an organization or as a workplace that has a culture of diversity and inclusion.
That's when you get your productivity and your
That's
business,
right.
Exactly.
business
Right.
case.
It's not
and your
just
top
going to
line.
come in because you have some metric or some target or goal that you have met, and then you're wondering, but where are the numbers? Where are the results? Right? It is about all living that promise and what you are looking to do. Yeah.
And I don't think it's a straight journey.
No, it's not, and it doesn't
pivots,
happen overnight
changes.
as well, right? So culture takes it's a constant fluid state, right?
Aroshi, if I may bring in a little bit about support structures, if we are going to talk about gender as an example, talk us through a little bit about your advice to women and what kind of support structure they should be creating for themselves so that they are in it for the long haul.
So Bani, as I think we discussed earlier, or it's been out there in many fora, a lot of Sri Lankan women are qualifying. There are more women qualifying from university, from CIMA to everything else than actually men. One thing that really holds them back is that you don't have that support structure. I was in this commission, Human Resource Development Commission, a few years back, and we were doing these studies to understand what is holding women back. And Couple of the things were transport. They did not have security in traveling, right? So you have companies like the apparel industry, the entire industry, if you take, you have transport, buses, vans, to whatever, which are transporting 60,000 employees up and down on a daily basis, right? So you as an organization have to create, and it goes back to the culture also that Kshanika was talking about. How do you create that culture and that engagement with your employees? So the productivity levels are completely different from the rest of the Sri Lankan enterprises you have. So the apparel industry is one of the, it's doing brilliantly even within this COVID period, right? Because the support structures that are required are really being put in there. They have creches in each of the factories, in the offices. And from a woman's perspective, I think we can't always, so if we are not in the apparel industry or in the IT industry, we can't say, oh my gosh, I don't have a support structure, what do I do, right? You also have a duty, you're qualifying out of university on taxpayers' money, I might add. It's free education unlike anywhere else in the world, right? You have a duty to take yourself further, right? So that aspiration to be something, I think, has to be drilled into the women themselves. And once you figure that out, you will figure out what are the support structures you need and how do I get them sorted out, right? It might be your parents. Now for me, my parents were there, the entire childcare part of it was taken care of, right? Yeah. I do a lot of coaching, particularly for the banking sector. Hundreds of women that I have coached, and some of them were willing to give up multinational bank jobs because they had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever to make 3 different types of food for their kids and the husband and for themselves. And I was just like, pay whatever the small amount you have to pay and get a maid. Why would you give up a job just for something like this, right? So I think we also as women shouldn't be giving up so easily. We need to figure out what is it that's required and how do we, look at a slightly broader picture and go out of the box and figure out what is it that we need to do and get that done. So in terms of the employer and individually both ways, I think it has to really kick in.
I'd just add to that, I think one of the things that COVID has been helping is getting employers to shift their perspectives on what it means to have a full-time job or a permanent job. I mean, gone are the days where you have to be in the office at 8 a.m. and you've got to be there all day until 5:30 and then you catch your bus home. I mean, it's, some businesses have gone back to that model, but the majority of businesses have recognized, okay, A, that doesn't actually work for our employees. B, it's actually not necessary in terms of delivering on our objectives and delivering on our business. So I think one of the things that we expect and we hope will be a real boon for women coming into the workforce is they will have greater opportunities to say, I need this kind of flexibility. I do have responsibilities, and men also have responsibilities. And the more that men take on some of those shared responsibilities like household responsibilities and child rearing, it becomes a shared responsibility, and then both women and men can go in and start asking and demanding this kind of flexibility. So I think we're seeing it shift. It may still be incremental. In some industries, I mean, the IT industry for sure has been a real leader in this in Sri Lanka, and they've really pushed the envelope in terms of creating these kind of environments. But definitely there's a lot of responsibility on employers to be thinking about employment differently.
I guess one way I would put that is like the employer has that responsibility, the family has the responsibility. Yes. It's not a woman's role or a man's role. And also employees are requesting some of these equity related requirements instead of always expecting the company to be able to figure it out or read your mind. Like to go ask.
Yes.
Suggest. Great. So I think we've kind of covered diversity, inclusion, equity. We've also covered a lot about the roles employee would play, the role individually, part of a partnership. I think all of those bits are important. I'd like to touch on what you started on before, which was about the access to markets. And when we talk about diversity, the different aspects of diversity and how much we're leaving on the table, companies are leaving on the table. Care to share a little bit more on that?
And thanks, Bani. I mean, I think so often when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we only think about it internally. And we often forget about this aspect of these are diverse markets that all of our businesses are serving. And I'll give you just a couple of numbers to think about. So Sri Lanka has more than 1.7 million people who live with a disability. That's a huge market, right? There's an estimated close to 6% of the population are LGBTQI. There was a recent study in Sri Lanka which estimates that actually in Sri Lanka it might be as many as 1.5 million.
I would think it's much higher.
So 1.5 million people who are LGBTQI in Sri Lanka. So at the global level, there's been some studies which show that for people with disabilities, there's a close to $2 trillion in annual disposable income that community has to spend. And then if you add on all of their friends and families who are also going to spend money to support them, it comes to more like $3.5 billion. So we are talking about huge market segments. And, to effectively reach those markets, obviously it's incredibly helpful to have a diverse workforce, a workforce that actually reflects the markets that you're trying to serve. Because it's really about designing and delivering products that actually meet the needs of those consumers. And so there's a couple of really great company examples that I wanted to just reflect on. So Hsbc, obviously a huge global brand, they have made a push to become the bank of choice for disabled customers and the employer of choice for disabled employees. And so what they have done is they have launched a disability smart banking solution platform, basically. So all of their solutions will be accessible to people who are deaf, to people who are blind, to people with, who have other motor neuron, disabilities. And so they've been really working on developing customer-facing products that actually serve that market. And then closer to home, in the apparel sector, the adaptive clothing market, again, a huge market and something which Sri Lanka has the opportunity to tap into in a really big way. Yeah. And we're already seeing some of the garment manufacturers such as MAS who are very active in this market. And it was great to see 2 years ago, I think it was, that MAS actually partnered with the National Paralympic Committee to design and make all of the clothing for their athletes. Yeah. And so this is clothing that is, using different types of fasteners so that people who are differently able can actually get dressed themselves. So when we think about it at that level, it's not rocket science. It's just giving people the products and services that they can use and that enable them to live their life to the fullest. And as a business, that's just smart business.
Exactly. And if I can just add to that, in order to serve those markets effectively, to be innovative, to be able to address the needs in a way that it actually makes sense for the people who are using it, then you need to have employees on your teams, the workforce, right?
Who can understand.
Who
can design those
only
products. Somebody
who has that disability can really design something or understand how difficult it might be to get into a particular, just enter the premises if you don't have disability access, right? So, these are primarily the reasons why. HSBC has disability access to the bank, right? To start with, I'm just saying. I'm sure several others do as well. But if you don't, it's like saying if you don't get your act together at home, then you can't get out there. And it's the basics, right? So you need to have those people on your team to be able to. You have to mirror society. In order to be able to address the needs of society, and then that customer centricity comes, because then you can actually build products that are actually needed by the people who actually understand them the most.
Yeah. So that's a great point about mirroring society, and how do we actually measure it and hold ourselves or companies accountable. I know sometimes measurement dashboards tend to kind of get carried away. But I'm putting it on the table as to what would be some of the basic measures, easy measures companies can start with so that they can hold themselves accountable, because we all know what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say, I mean, on the employee side, the first thing to do is to actually understand who's in your workforce. So, you know, collect some of that demographic data, start to ask questions, and they can be anonymous, but to start to identify what proportion of your workforce has a disability, what proportion of your workforce identifies as LGBTQI, what proportion of your workforce, you know, start to actually get some data. So then you can identify, okay, now that we know who's in our workforce and how diverse we are, maybe we can identify a couple of areas where we really need to focus on bringing in more diversity. So I would say that's a great first place to start.
Yeah.
By no means the end, but it's a good starting point.
Probably another thing is to measure what kind of experience they're having in the organization, right? Because that whole inclusivity will come saying, you know, okay, we may have diversity in the organization, but are we including them in the fabric? Is the social fabric of our organization becoming something, you know, that they are contributing to, that there's egalitarian treatment, that they're all getting the opportunities to whether it's develop or be promoted or do the projects or really shine in their environments, or are they being held back, right? So that's another measure that's important to understand what they're experiencing and whether they have the opportunities as well.
And also, Bani, in terms of technology, today's technology is there to support, you know, the data mining that is required to find out those data points. The technology is also available to produce goods if required, right, on a smaller scale. Now the Ford T model, where everything had to be that black Ford car which is coming out of the production line, is no longer valid, you know. And our society, to a certain extent, is narcissistic enough to demand, I want my underwear branded with my name on it or whatever, right? And you need to be able to cater to that as an organization. So understanding your workforce and understanding your customers, and definitely providing that leadership that is required at the topmost level, I think is very important.
I think that's the other valid point, or the point that I wanted to bring, which is when you're measuring diversity in numbers, percentages, measuring it in leadership is just as important, because we tend to go the easy route of measuring as a whole.
Correct.
But you do need role models, you do need young generation to aspire and see themselves in the senior leaders. If I may bring up one other topic, and I've heard this plenty of times, I think you all have had too. When it comes to recruitment, we all hear this thing about recruiting on merit. Can we unpack a little bit about what this merit actually means and how unconscious bias kind of gets in the way of merit if we're not careful?
Yeah, maybe I'll kick off with just a reflection on a Harvard business study that was done a couple of years ago, where they actually analysed companies that this was in the space of promotions, companies whose promotion criteria was merit-based versus companies who had, you know, kind of specific criteria for promotions. They consistently promoted more men than women, even when women had exactly the same, you know, scorecards, etc. So this idea of merit being the kind of the be all and end all can actually hide and and enable unconscious bias to actually be much more prevalent.
May I just add, in terms of, say, a performance appraisal, I'm in the HR space, we're looking at appraisals which were done 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and you go and look at those KPIs and see whether anything has changed. It hasn't, right? So you now need to start thinking about who's, all of our, if you take bottom line wise, what is making impact? Your relationship with your customers, let's say, is that in your KPI sheet, right? CRM, customer relationship management. Have you pushed it from a 3 to a 5 in the past financial year? Nobody's measuring that because you right? So now if your relationship is that good, you will be looking at the profitability hitting your P&L in the next year or the year after, right? Because this is a long-term journey with your relationship with your customer. So those metrics need to start changing, and they've been stacked a little bit in the older generations, older models, and we really need to start thinking of that and looking at what is relevant today.
Yeah, I think it needs to move a little bit also to the model of continuous assessment as opposed to taking at a point in time, even the year or half year or quarterly, because most KPIs, as Aroshi also said, will be around hard numbers, right? And then there are lot of softer areas that if you haven't defined your scorecards well or your KPI or measurements well, right, that do not get captured. And the reality is, in most organizations, the women are in the softer skilled jobs, right? So you may not actually see that, let's say, for example, a secretary who's getting you all those meetings or getting you all those connect calls for the customer relationship manager, right? Who then says, oh, I had this many calls with my clients, and I have this number of connects, and my relationship management is excellent. But it may be actually somebody else who has that rapport with that gentleman or lady secretary or someone else to even get through the door to a meeting or to get into that conversation. Now, does that get measured? And who gets the credit? Who is then merited for that success? Right? So the softer skills or the lower levels, the SSUs, the support units, right, where their contribution is not measured in the same way, may not get the same amount of focus in a meritocracy only system. Meritocracy is not a bad thing. We need to have people, you need to make decisions based on merit, but it's not the only method that we should be.
I think defining that merit is the most important thing.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
But it also goes back to Kshanika's earlier points about equity, and that sometimes, as Aroshi was saying, that merit has been defined by, a traditional worldview, and it doesn't factor in the fact that, as people are bringing in these different skills, and so that's where sometimes this equity question also comes in. That sometimes merit is not the only decision on which to make. Right. Merit has to be there, but there are other factors that also need to be considered if we really want to build these diverse workforces.
I think one of the other notions or maybe myths is that everything needs to be equal, right? And everything will never be equal.
And it's not equal.
It's not equal either, right? So these inequalities are there, which is why you need the equity also. Some people need the step up, some people need support, some people, because they're bringing something else that someone else cannot bring to the agenda, right? Or to the workforce in this case, right? So then we have to have different ways of recognizing and bringing merit to those people as well. Right?
I think that's a really valid point, and I think the way I'd like to put it here is, when we talk about leadership and development, I think if you think of it from a few years ago, it is very much about being in charge, being in control. Those were kinds of the terms that we used for leadership.
The alpha male.
Exactly. And realistically, what you hear about leadership now is that it's messy. There is no straight way to do it, and it will get messy, and that's part of it. And that's where the authenticity comes. That's where the belonging comes. That's where the trust comes. Because if you see the boss being able to make a mistake and apologize, there's so much more trust and a rapport that is built. And then you kind of have the kind of cohesion, the collaboration that is required. And those, I think, are the outcomes we're talking about when it comes to diverse teams. And even when you think of a family and a family that has somebody with disability, the characteristics that come out in people, the kindness, all of those aspects, I think, come out in company cultures as well. And that is where the real magic or gold sits. Correct. Which I think sometimes, like you very rightly said, we're so busy measuring the obvious that
you miss them.
That you miss out on the finer points, and that's kind of where that competitive advantage, the new things that we're all working on, the customization that you spoke about.
And unfortunately, it's most often the disadvantaged in one form or the other. I mean, it could be women, it could be aged population, it could be people with disabilities, or whatever, makes them disadvantaged, right? It could be that they are working single mothers, or traveling from a distance. Unfortunately, they are the ones who get caught up in that vicious web of they're not able to come to the surface or come to the top in terms of an entirely 100% meritocracy-based system by itself. Yeah.
And it's those very disadvantages become access to marketplaces in providing special features on your products, on your services. So if you have this vanilla, all same, all similar looking product force, that's all that they can create on the other side. So if I were to try and summarize everything we spoke about today, diversity is important. Diversity is reality. Diversity is what we live and breathe every day. But how we actually make that a reality in the workforces, in the community, takes a bit of effort, takes a bit of reflection. And in order to be able to do that, companies do have to take a step forward towards being aware and taking that as a priority in how they build cultures. And when it comes to building cultures, it's not just the soft things, it is the hard points like measuring, keeping yourself accountable. And there are lots of different ways. We're seeing it all over the world. We're beginning to see it in Sri Lanka, which is taking a slow toll in, but I think conversations like this are really important to actually get it to the forefront and to make it mainstream. While gender is one of the topics that we are sort of celebrating this month and are in the front and center most of the time, diversity is not just about gender. There is so many different angles because all of us are different. I mean, the four of us, might be women, but we're very, very different. And I think sometimes we forget about that when we are talking about strategy and game plans, etc. So I think, are there any other points you all would like to bring up? Or I think we've kind of covered what we think we want to cover. In other words, why diverse teams drive better outcomes, I think, is not just one answer. It's many. And there are many ways to look at it. There are many ways to go about it. But it starts with being aware and holding ourselves accountable.
If there's one thing maybe I can add, I think the new generation that's coming into the workforce, I mean, not Generation Y is very well embedded in the workforce, there's Generation Z coming into the workforce, and they passionately want to see more diversity they have no tolerance for lack of diversity, right? Because they are also very, very different individuals. The way they work, their aspirations, the way they see the world, right? So they are, the younger generation is more likely, I mean, there are statistics, of course, they say 67% of them are more likely to join an organization or a workforce that shows diversity, right? And then 72% are likely to leave an organization for a more inclusive environment, right? So there are lots of statistics like that tell us it's a very good reason for organizations to actually understand why they need to invest in this, and really, we're already too late, right? This really has to be something that we're doing day in, day out today.
Yeah. I'll take that as a final comment, and thank you all for joining this wonderful discussion, and hope to see more of this and see all of you all more with conversations like this in the future.
Thank you, Bani.
Thanks, Bani. Thank you.
This is a rapid fire round with Kasturi on She Slays for Echelon. So, Kasturi, to get us started, how do you usually start your day?
That's the easy one, I think. So I start with exercise, then prayer or church, and then start the day working. Before that, I missed one thing. I go and see my mom, who lives in the house next door. That's about it.
All right. Next one. What's the last thing that made you laugh?
Last thing was this. I did a shoot for the Echelon, which was absolutely out of my comfort zone. Yeah.
Nice. That's good to hear that, and good to have been a part of it. What would you say to your younger self, Kasturi?
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know what, it'll turn out okay. I wish that younger self hadn't worried and cried so much when things went wrong, but it would turn out okay, so not to worry.
Beautiful. Which song best describes you?
I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor.
All right. Power on. What's your favorite quotes or words to live by?
I have one personally, is be the change you want to see in the world. On a corporate side, I think I use this all the time. What got you here is not going to get you there. So it's Marshall Goldsmith's thing. Yeah.
Yes, fantastic. And what does being a female mean to you?
It's a tag of a gender, but for me it's being able to be who I am. And what goes with the package of me being a female means I'll be passionate about stuff, I'll be very emotional, I can swing from being sad to happy to getting angry when things are not done. And we have a high level of empathy, but that's my package. But with that package, I can do what I have to do. Being able to be yourself and do a job in whichever gender can do that job, but without changing yourself, is being feminine for me.
That's, I think, answer I will live by. What's one thing in your bucket list that you would wish to do?
I think to go, I've been talking about it with borders opening, go to Rwanda and be with the gorillas, up close and personal.
All right.
So should do that in the next 2 years.
We're looking forward for pictures. Yeah. What's your guilty pleasure?
Okay. The easy one is my desserts. I technically try to avoid sweets, but I kind of hold back all the no sugar on tea and coffee and stuff, and I end up having a dark chocolate or something like that. That's my guilty pleasure.
Great. What would your perfect Saturday be like?
Yeah, so that's the feminine side of it. Okay, it starts with me doing yoga and whatever, but I like my time. I need my time at either I get a massage or I do my salon stuff. Just feel good about myself, spending time on myself and alone. So, yeah, just taking care of myself for that kind of way. So it's whether it's a spa or whether it's a salon or massage or, it's for me.
In your words, describe feminism.
Live your dreams, do what you want to do without having any constraints by being a female. So if you want to go and unleash your potential, just being a female shouldn't hold you back. So feminism is you being able to unleash your potential and do what you dream about doing and want to do.
And what is your deepest fear?
Heights.
Really?
It transforms in lots of ways. In looking down and I see I climbing, but simple things like doing a headstand means you'll fall down, right? Those small things. So the fear of heights, it's a big barrier in doing lots of stuff. I can swim, but when I go into the deep end, the fear of heights keeps me back. Yeah.
That's interesting. What other jobs would you take instead of the one that you have right now?
A travel guide so that I can see the world.
Retirement plan. What was the last advice you gave someone?
I don't know. Maybe it's mainly, I think, with all the tough things which go on in the environment currently, I think our younger staff who have larger roles, we give the young talent opportunities. I've been advising them to take it in bite-sized pieces. Don't solve this complete puzzle. Don't think you have to solve everything. take a bite, solve it. You might open up and think about a new solution tomorrow. Encouraging them not to pressurize themselves too much. Yeah.
And what words of wisdom did your mother or grandmother share with you?
It was both my mother, because my grandma I think she passed away when actually she didn't give me too much of advice, but only showed love to us. My mother said she had one thing of me getting a qualification. A woman has to have a qualification. And that was not necessary to have a career. It was simply to be able to be financially independent if the need arose. Simply as that. Simple. And second thing was, don't learn to cook because you'll become a slave in the kitchen.
I wish someone told me that. Last question. Do you experience resistance when you're leading men?
Remember, I've been over time, right? I've been leading teams, predominantly male, more male representatives in the teams. But I wouldn't say, I don't think it's resistance, but it was kind of wariness of where does the power lie. Is it a power struggle, or is it just a person doing her job? So I think there was wariness, but to be fair, now I don't feel it at all. It's each one has a role to do. I may be having the title of a leader, but I wouldn't be able to get anything done because they need to be able to do their work. So it's not about being the boss. It's about all of us doing our part to achieve what we set out to do.
She Slays Rapid Fire starts now. Let's start with Kshanika. How would you usually start your day?
Oh, with a cup of tea. I cannot get going without a cup of tea. Yeah.
Let's go to Sarah. What's one thing you wished you enjoyed more?
TV.
All right. Let's go into a little bit more of a philosophical one. To Aroshi, what would you say to your younger self or child self?
I would say, having gone through this journey, I would say pick the battles that you want to really fight.
That sounds like a good one. What's your favorite emoji, Sarah?
I'm no good with emojis.
At all. Okay. Anybody else want to try that one?
The laughing ones. I love to bully people all the time with the laughing emojis. Yeah.
Tell me one word that describes you, Sarah. Back to you.
Passionate.
Okay. Aroshi, what is one missed opportunity that you wish you could have had a second chance at?
Actually, I think I've picked, I've had a very checkered sort of past. I've been in banking. I've been in banking, moved into HR, moved into risk management. So I've just gone completely. I've taken the opportunities that I wanted to, that have come my way. So I don't think there are any regrets there. One thing that is just in me is that I have this real need to start like a business on my own. Maybe in fashion, maybe in food, it's just nagging inside my brain. So at some point I need to do something about it.
Okay. Over to you, Kshanika. What would your perfect Saturday be like?
So I would start it with a cup of tea. Can't get going without that. And then I'm a late starter. I like to take my time about waking up and ambling around the house and catching up with the news. I love reading the newspaper, the physical paper, right? So that kind of sets the mood for the day. And then I like to get out and do things physically. I'm a real outdoorsy person. So I would go to a good market or go somewhere, take a walk about, and the more physical it gets, the better the day is.
Okay. Over to you, Sarah. What's your favorite item in your bag?
I actually like the bag itself.
Aroshi, are you a morning person or a night person?
I started off being a morning person, and now my son stays up till 3 in the morning, It's just like, so he shifted me completely that way, but I brought myself now back to being a morning person. So I've done it both ways.
Kshanika, what's your favorite show growing up?
I didn't watch a lot of TV or movies because I was in boarding school right out. But I would go any day with the Bond series if I was to watch movies.
Any other options you'd like to share about?
I have this one from way past. From I think when TV just came out, kind of thing. It was called Bear Cats, with these two guys on I don't know what you call it even, on this little train thingy, right? I don't know what you call it. It's just one little, no hood or anything, and they go like that. And it was a really funny one. I don't know how many remember it. Even just a very vague memory in my mind that I really enjoyed it.
Stuck with you. Sarah, what's your go-to snack?
Well, it depends a bit on the time of day. If it's during the day and I'm at work, then I would go for some nuts, cashews, almonds, something like that. If it's in the evening, then it has to be something salty.
I'm into graham crackers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I take them in my handbag.
I have almonds.
Yeah.
Aroshi, what's your latest trend that you're into these days?
Health and fitness. In terms of health, no eating.
I think that's the opposite of health.
Unfortunately, try not to eat at all, but keep it very light. If I have to eat soup and salad and that kind of thing. And working out, sometimes twice a day, morning and evening kind of thing. So yeah, it's a health trend at the moment.
Your morning start and her day would fit perfectly well.
I know.